Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Live at 5 with me, your curator host, Kevin Adkisson. I am coming to you today from Brookside School, in particular the Early Childhood Center that is a 1996 addition to Brookside School. I am your curator, Kevin Adkisson, with the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research, and we'll see what all we can see inside this remarkable little building. Now, I've done other tours that focused on the outside of the Early Childhood Center and Brookside School, so today I want to get right inside. From the outside, we see that it is a concrete block building. The concrete block was specifically chosen at the block yard. It's a custom block that's meant to be evocative of Saarinen's architecture and Albert Kahn before him. I love the way that the bricks fit into the blocks, and even the rain gutters are coming down in between the blocks. That's also how the architect hid the expansion joints on the building, was with those gutters. Now, stepping into the ECC, we have this irregularly shaped lobby area, which has the beams that are revealed in the ceiling above. And the building has this real clarity to its construction. There's virtually no storage in the building, as you will see when we move throughout. The teachers have things everywhere. But because there's no storage, there's no sort of mechanical what we might call ceiling lasagna that blocks the what you see as the ceiling versus the structure above. These are the wooden beams that are supporting the slate roof above. You can see through the skylight just how thin the actual ceiling construction is. Now, the architect of this building was Peter Rose, and Peter Rose is a Canadian-born and practicing architect from Montreal. He studied undergrad and his master's of architecture at Yale. He's taught at Princeton, Harvard, and McGill. And he designed this building between 1991 and 1996. And he designed it with all these charming features that the children can enjoy, like this window seat where you can look back on the historic Brookside School, as well as down the side of Peter Rose's building. Rose also designed all of the furniture for the ECC, or it was designed with Peter Rose, and Dan Hoffman is the attributed designer. Dan Hoffman was head of the architecture department at Cranbrook Academy of Art, and all of these chairs, which are now about 25 years old, were made at the Cranbrook Architectural Office, and they're made out of bent plywood, which has, of course, a long history at Cranbrook with designers like Eero Saarinen and Charles Eames working in molded plywood. There's also all these little details like very short sinks and very, very short water fountains. The students here are ages 3 through 5, so you can see my knee is actually higher than that water fountain. And across in the other junior kindergarten room, some of the storage was built later by Dan Hoffman because there is so little storage space. But I love the way that the architect also uses these tiny little windows where you can just imagine a 3 or 4-year-old looking out for mom and dad in the courtyard from this tiny window next to this tiny kitchen. And then there's the sort of adult-sized windows at the front of the classroom. Here you see more of the exposed beamwork on the ceiling plane. And then there are these wonderful forts that are original to the building. And so you see how the kids can climb up here, and then they can look out through these little peak windows, or they can view out over their sort of dominion, their kingdom. Now, all of the floors in this building are battleship linoleum, which is the same flooring material that Saarinen used at Kingswood. And then there are sculptures throughout the building as well. This is a moose, a young moose by Carl Millis, Millis sculpted this in 1926. This is a 1920, or he sculpted it in 1923. This is a circa 1926 casting, part of the Art Museum collection, so that every Cranbrook building essentially has a Carl Millis in his, Swedish moose natural habitat. I love the way that he's placed, where he's on this beam coming out and then looking back at the hallway up above. Now you see the clarity of construction from the concrete block wall to the wooden post and beam wall to then the steel detail of the stairway. And then we descend underneath the moose down into additional classroom wings. You'll notice as I pass the lockers that every single locker has a different design on it. And Peter Rose thought that children this young can't read, and so he would give each of them their own symbol to learn and to know that that was their locker. That has not worked, but the school apparently, if they get word that Peter Rose is going to come into town, will go through and rip off all the additional signage so that they can, say, no, the children use it. I don't think they would actually do that, but it'd be very much a Frank Lloyd Wright client type thing to do, to go back to the architect's vision. What I see in these wonderful little lockers are the same repetitions of simple forms and geometries that Eliel Saarinen used at the Art Museum, in the Art Museum door, which has its geometric right angles and then the little 1/8 of an inch circle curves. And then you see how the building sort of wanders around, and there's no sort of double-loaded corridors. There's no real regularity to the building. Peter Rose wanted to, he challenged the of the original school without breaking the spell. And so all the rooms are slightly different. You'll see here in the science classroom, are you with me? Internet connection apparently not 1,000% stable here. In the science classroom, we have a very different ceiling construction now with skylights moving across the entire roof, so you could see out and you could study the clouds up above. And then down below, you see the way that the skylight pushes up into the second level and makes a very long, narrow room. And what I love about this building is the quality that these rooms have, where each one really feels substantially different. Now we've left technically the nest of the Early Childhood Center, and we've come into the just general Brookside School. So the addition was both the Early Childhood Center, Science, and Performing Arts. And then everything, just like Saarinen did, everything is custom. So you have custom Peter Rose doors. If you're just joining me, our tour today, we're looking at Peter Rose's 1996 Early Childhood Center, which is an addition to Brookside School. And depending on how quickly we move, we'll just see how much of Brookside we can see. I know that this is a highly desired tour for us to take after we visited the exterior of the school. Now out here on this balcony, Rose envisioned that the students could come out, and I heard some teachers want to enclose this for storage. That will happen, not on my watch. But the students like to come out here and they can paint like Picasso from the roof patio. This is also where they learn 1-point and 2-point perspective, looking out at the older Brookside building and tower. Stepping back inside through a very well-appointed steel casement door, we come into the orchestra practice room, which I love. Again, this clarity of construction where you just really understand the thickness of the wall, the layout of the building. Rose puts windows on essentially 4 sides of the buildings because these are little pavilions out alongside the river. And you have north-facing skylights, so you'll never get the harsh sun, southern sun coming into the room. And then acoustical performance is enhanced with the carpet down below and the acoustical tiles up above. I love that you can also step outside here in the music room onto this little Juliet balcony, which the architect envisioned the students bringing their trumpets or their quartets out here and playing for the students at their recess. This is also where you can get a good sense of Brookside being beside a brook. There's the science classrooms that we were just in that popped up above the roof line. Again, this storybook character of extending the charm of the original building. And then the classrooms there. In the 1959 gym edition, another expansion joint / drain gutter. Now, it is a 3-story building, but it is pretty clever how the third floor is attached. It's only in this room. And I think thinking about, well, both as an adult, because why not find joy in architecture, but especially as a child, moving through these spaces where you are going up and down and where you don't quite understand the regularity, the sort of not perfectly Cartesian layout of the building is really wonderful. And so here you have the strings practice room with another view back towards the school. And instead of a fireplace anchoring this room, it's the radiator, but it has this custom plasma cut steel screen, which almost reads like a fireplace screen. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in. I know we're moving pretty quickly today. I'm trying to perfect my tour pacing of what to show you versus what to linger on. Here you get another sense of Peter Rose's clarity of construction. He talked a lot about, in designing this building, the need for it to reflect both the 1920s buildings and the spirit of this sort of Storybook cottage, but then be reflective of building of the age. And so it's a very modern construction system with the I-beam supporting a concrete floor plate, and he leaves it exposed so you understand the construction system, but as a whole it creates something that is much more compelling and sophisticated and charming. Now this is Jonah and his Fishbone harp, which is by Tex Schweitz, and Tex was a student of Carl Millis, who then became head of the Academy's sculpture department in the 1950s and 1960s. And Tex here depicts Jonah not coming out of the whale's mouth, which is what his mentor Carl Millis did at the Jonah Terrace, but now Jonah is playing the whalebone as a harp. And again, the architect has placed it on this very sculptural steel beam that is akin to the relationship Eliel Saarinen had with Millis's sculpture, where Saarinen would design the base and then Millis, his sculptures would sit on top of it. Here, Peter Rose has quite carefully calibrated the design of this 2-story stair hall for that precise sculpture. There are later sculptures that are not part of the Art Museum's collection, but are part of the Brookside collection. We'll get to that red sculpture in a moment. Just looking outside of the music wing, briefly, you see the way that the music room sort of hangs off to the side in the zinc-clad box. Reminds me of the zinc-clad box at the Raphael Moneo building, and Saarinen's use of zinc elsewhere on campus. And then there are the cast concrete window lintels, and then the children's handprints that are put into the wall. And so those are students from the classes of are circa 94, 95, 96. And I do think that Peter Rose achieves the sort of nook and cranny quality that he respected in the original buildings. There is no artist on the tile mosaic to answer that question. The next fragment This is from George and Ellen Scripps Booth's house down in Detroit, their Trumbull Avenue home from 1889, designed by Detroit architects Mason and Rice. This is the tympanum, the over-door carving, which has two putti, little cherubs, surrounding a shield of unknown representation with a shell form behind it, very typical of Victorian architecture in Ohio red sandstone, I believe. The mosaic was a gift from the 5th grade class, and they all worked on it with direction from the artist. How fun. The tympanum here, when the Booths built Cranbrook House in 1908, they eventually sold the Detroit home, which was on Trumbull and Maple, what's now Trumbull and Martin Luther King, and their house was expanded and converted into a Detroit public library. In 1967, DPS built a new library on the property and tore the Booth home down, and Henry Booth gathered a lot of the architectural ornament and brought it here to Cranbrook, where it lived in our boneyard until it was brought to the ECC in 96. And here you can see the Booth front door from 1889 and the house from 1889. Mason and Rice were the architects who where Albert Kahn got his start as a young stable boy. So now we're in the hallway that transitions to the original Brookside, which you can see Peter Rose's vision of the building as a sort of storybook cottage. Another piece of art from 96, 97. And then we're moving into a 1929 gymnasium by Henry Booth, the multi-purpose room, our little gym. And Henry Booth was the youngest son of George and Ellen Scripps Booth. He studied architecture at the University of Michigan with Eliel Saarinen. He's one of the reasons that Eliel Saarinen came to Cranbrook to be our architect. Saarinen did not work here at Brookside, but Henry Booth was the designer of this school, including the light fixtures, which could use a different light bulb in them. As we move on through the school, we'll see the 1959 gymnasium is down that hallway. A portrait of Jessie Winter, who was the first headmistress here at the Bloomfield Hill School of 1922, and she stayed here at the school until the early 1970s. And then we'll come up into Henry Booth's 1929 lobby of the school with another student gift, a Pewabic owl from 2002. Now this is Henry Booth's more Art Deco lobby with this really wonderful 1929 light fixture chandelier made out of hexagons and triangles and different geometries. Also underneath this great brick vault is this Marshall Fredericks clown from 1937 with this lovely bronze patina. There are also a set of Chinese bells, reproduction of the originals, and then a 50th anniversary 1973 tapestry or needlepoint that was designed by a New York weaver but produced by Brookside parents that hangs here in the lobby. This is the original cloister, and the cloisters, these were paned windows that opened into an open courtyard. It was enclosed in 1962, or around about then, by Bob Swanson, who was Eliel Saarinen's grandson, who was also an architect, and so it was converted from a cloister to the library. And in the cloister, there is this flint fence tile fountain, which has a Geza Marotti pelican with children above. And this was actually sculpted for Cranbrook School for Boys by the Hungarian architect and sculptor, but for whatever reason, it was never installed at the School for Boys. So it was placed here as part of this fountain grouping a little bit later on. Now, as we keep moving through the meandering building, still on battleship linoleum, which is throughout the whole school. This is the big dining room designed by Henry Booth with Henry Booth light fixtures and Dan Hoffman custom plywood chairs, now for larger children. And then the littlest kids eat here in the little dining room. As we move around and turn the corner, we are getting closer to the 1925 wing of the school. There's also a 1939 wing of the school and a 1922 wing of the school. We'll step in here to the 1922 wing, which this little classroom has a series of windows that were done by a Scottish artist, A. Alexander, I believe, representing music here, and then dance. Next is geography with the great giant globe. And then here is drama. And lastly, mathematics. And these were by Alexander K. Herbert, who was a Scottish designer. And then next up is a set of booths left there, is the Meetinghouse. I do not know what the capacity is. I think it's about 20 students a year, grades pre-kindergarten through 5th grade, but that may be too small. So this is the Meetinghouse. This is where Cranbrook began. This was a room designed by George Booth, built with the leftover material of the 1918 library at Cranbrook House. This is where Henry Wood Booth, George's father, had Sunday school lessons. In 1918, it's where Christ Church Cranbrook began in 1924. It's where the Bloomfield Hill School started in 22. Before that, there was actually a day school run by Grace Booth Wallace. And it was designed with the leftover material from the library at Cranbrook House and then ornamented by artisans from the Detroit Society of Arts and Crafts, including Johann Kirschmeyer, who carved the overmantel and all the woodwork at Cranbrook House, carved the saints. Here you see St. Matthew. On the other side, across the decorated beam, you see St. Mark. And then you have this wonderful grouping of the young child, the scholar, and then the youth playing a lyre, painted by Catherine McEwen, who did all the frescoes at Christ Church Cranbrook, the frescoes in Studio Loya Saarinen, as well as the frescoes in the lower dining hall of Cranbrook School. She was a redhead. All of her characters are redheads. I'm a redhead. We have great synergy between us. If we look out the front of the Meetinghouse, you can see here is the brook from which Brookside gets its name. And so you see it running alongside the school, behind the school. There's a little spiral staircase that takes us down to classrooms below. And if you'll bear with me, I have a very special spot. Here you see the Storybook Garden, built by Walker Macy about 10, 15 years ago. I have a very special place I would like to end our tour today. There are classrooms below me, there are classrooms above me, behind me. We will backtrack though. There you see the classroom building. And a lot of the furniture here, a lot of the original furnishings survive. Many of the classrooms have fireplaces in them. You see the Cloister benches here. These are original to the Meetinghouse. And then our last couple of spaces, there's this really wonderful art room here which is another Henry Booth design. This is the building that stretches out over Cranbrook Road. And now you see, instead of just wooden beams, Henry Booth is using steel I-beams as well as the wooden beams. There's a deer head up there. But I don't know what the square footage is. It's large. Now don't get dizzy. I don't know what will be better. Probably let's look at me and see how well I can climb and chat, because we are headed up, and away. So, Brookside has given me permission to bring you into the tower. And so now all of Brookside is our oyster. There you see the Early Childhood Center. There's the 1959 edition, the Gymnasium, the playground. I believe that was Ralph Booth's house, one of the children. All 5 of the Booth children lived around campus. And then here we can see the various editions of Brookside. There, Christchurch Cranbrook peeking out, the wonderful tower stairway with its copper roof. And then on this side, if we had been maybe a week before, you would see Cranbrook House is behind the woods there, and you can just see Kingswood peeking out there. So thanks for coming along on this quick tour of the mysterious, wonderful Brookside. I'll try and do this again. There's so much more to see in this building. It's really wonderful. I can only imagine how it inspires the kids who are lucky enough to be able to use this total accretion of a building. Thanks for joining. This should hopefully post to stories. Tomorrow on Facebook Live, we'll be going to the Frank Lloyd Wright Smith House, and Thursday we'll be back at 5 o'clock for another Live at 5 with me, your curator and host, Kevin Adkisson, with the Center for Collections and Research. Thanks for joining on this whirlwind of a tour.